I stood at the edge of the Vancouver Island docks, squinting against the morning light at the cargo vessel that would be my home for the next month. The Northern Star wasn't pretty, a weathered freighter with rust stains bleeding down her hull, but she looked solid enough. I adjusted my duffel bag on my shoulder and double-checked my certification papers before heading up the gangway. The metal clanged under my boots as I made my way aboard. 3 crew members were securing equipment near the bow, barely glancing my way as I stepped onto the deck. I'd worked enough ships to know the drill. Find the captain first, then get settled. "You cook?" A tall man with a salt and pepper beard approached, his posture straight as a mast. "Yes, sir, Maverick Cook reporting as scheduled." I handed over my paperwork. He gave the papers a cursory glance. "Chase Young, I captain this vessel. Your credentials look in order." He handed them back with a firm nod. "We're making a supply run up the coast. Should take about 3 weeks if weather holds. You'll be working with Thompson and Boyd most days." Captain Young gave me a quick tour of the essential areas: bridge, engine room, mess hall, speaking in clipped, efficient sentences. Nothing out of the ordinary, just standard cargo vessel operations. "You'll bunk here," he said, stopping at a small cabin with 4 narrow beds. 2 showed signs of occupancy, while 1 remained empty. "Get your gear stowed. We sail with the evening tide." I tossed my duffel onto the empty bunk and unpacked my few possessions. The cabin was bare bones: metal walls, a tiny shared bathroom, and storage lockers that had seen better decades, but I'd lived in worse places. The pay for this run was good, and that's what mattered. By late afternoon, I'd met most of the crew. Asher Thompson was a quiet guy with watchful eyes who ran through safety protocols with mechanical efficiency. Sage Boyd was more talkative, pointing out the quirks of the ship's equipment as he showed me the cargo securing systems I'd be helping maintain. "Mess is at 6, Boyd told me. "Cook's food is decent if you're not picky." The mess hall was cramped but clean, with 4 tables bolted to the floor and a serving counter separating the kitchen area. I filled my tray with some kind of beef stew and found an empty seat. The food was better than decent, hearty and well-seasoned. I was halfway through my meal when an older man with deeply lined features emerged from the kitchen. He wore a stained apron over work clothes and moved with the steady gait of someone who'd spent decades finding his balance on shifting decks. He spotted me immediately and made a straight line for my table. "You're Cook, the new guy." It wasn't a question. His voice was gravelly, worn by years of salt air. "That's right, Maverick." I extended my hand. He shook it briefly. "Johnny Nunez, I run the galley." He glanced around, then pulled something from his apron pocket, a folded piece of paper that looked worn at the edges. "Listen up," he said, his voice dropping. "I give this to all newcomers. These are the rules. You follow them exactly. No exceptions." I took the paper, unfolding it to reveal a handwritten list. 1. Never go on deck alone after dark or answer if you hear voices calling from the water. 2. Stay out of the cargo hold during daylight hours. 3. If the ship's radio calls your name at night, don't respond. Hang up immediately. 4. If the moon looks strange or larger than normal, don't look at it. Go inside. 5. If you notice a crew member you haven't seen before, don't speak to them or acknowledge their presence. 6. Keep lights on throughout the ship at night. If power fails, restore it immediately. I read through the list twice, waiting for the punchline. When none came, I looked up with a half smile. This some kind of initiation thing? Nunez didn't smile back. His eyes held mine with an intensity that made my smile fade. "This isn't a joke, kid. You want to make it back to port? You follow these rules, to the letter." He tapped the paper with a calloused finger. "Keep it with you." Something about his dead, serious expression made me fold the paper and slip it into my pocket. "Sure, whatever you say." Nunez nodded once, seemingly satisfied, and returned to the kitchen without another word. I finished my meal thinking he was either crazy or this was some elaborate hazing ritual for new crew members. Either way, I figured it was harmless to play along. The ship pulled away from dock that evening, engines thrumming beneath my feet as we headed out into open water. The first day passed in a blur of work, checking cargo lashings, learning the ship's systems, and falling into the rhythm of watches. The crew seemed competent if not particularly friendly, going about their duties with practiced efficiency. By my second day aboard, I'd almost forgotten about Nunez's strange list. I was paired with Thompson and Boyd, learning the specific cargo securing protocols the Northern Star used. The work was straightforward enough, though the ship's layout had some quirks I was still getting used to. That night, I took the midnight watch. The ship pushed steadily through calm seas under a clear sky scattered with stars. Around 1 a.m, I stepped outside to check some cargo tie-downs that had been flagged during the day shift. The night air hit me with a chill as I made my way across the deck, flashlight beam bouncing ahead of me. The ocean stretched black in all directions, our running lights casting weak pools of illumination that barely reached the water's surface. I was tightening a loose strap when I heard it, a voice, soft and distant, calling from somewhere over the rail. "Help! Please help us!" I straightened up, scanning the darkness. Nothing but empty ocean. "Hello?" I called, moving toward the rail. "Is someone there?" More voices joined the first, overlapping in whispered pleas. They seemed to be coming from directly below the ship. "We're trapped. Help us." I leaned over the rail, pointing my flashlight down at the water. The beam caught nothing but black waves slapping against the hull. Then I saw it, a faint glow beneath the surface, moving alongside the ship. At first, I thought it might be a reflection of our running lights, but the glow intensified, taking shape as it rose closer to the surface. What broke the water wasn't a human form as I'd half expected, but something massive and serpentine. The creature's body glowed with bioluminescent patterns that pulsed along its length as it moved parallel to the ship. I couldn't see its head or tail, just a middle section that stretched longer than our entire vessel. A low, resonant howling sound vibrated through the air, seeming to come from both everywhere and nowhere at once. The voices grew louder, more insistent, no longer sounding like pleas for help, but becoming something hungry, something inviting. "Join us, Maverick. Come closer." My name in their mouths snapped me out of my frozen state. I stumbled backward, dropping my flashlight. It clattered across the deck as I turned and ran for the nearest door, heart hammering against my ribs. I didn't stop until I reached the galley, where I collapsed into a chair, hands shaking as I tried to process what I'd seen. Minutes later, the galley door opened and Nunez walked in. He took one look at my face and sighed. "You went out on deck alone, didn't you?" I nodded, still trying to catch my breath. There was something in the water, something huge, and voices. They knew my name. Nunez poured 2 cups of coffee and set one in front of me. "That's why the first rule exists, kid. Never go on deck alone after dark." He tapped his temple. "And never answer if you hear voices calling from the water." What the hell was that thing? My voice sounded strange, even to my own ears. "Doesn't matter what it was. What matters is you know the rules now." He gave me a hard look, and why they need to be followed. I pulled the crumpled paper from my pocket, staring at the first rule with new understanding. "The others," I said quietly. "The other rules? They're for real too?" Nunez just nodded, taking a sip of his coffee. "Every single one." I woke up with a start, the ship's gentle rocking a reminder of where I was. The events from the night before still felt raw. The voices from the water, that massive creature with its bioluminescent patterns, and Terry's confirmation that the rules weren't some elaborate hazing ritual. I'd slept poorly, the folded paper with the 6 rules now tucked safely in my pocket. I pulled myself out of bed, dressed quickly, and headed to the mess for breakfast. The routine of the ship continued regardless of what lurked in the waters around us. I needed coffee, badly. As I walked down the narrow corridor toward the mess hall, I heard it. a low, rumbling growl coming from somewhere below deck. I stopped, listening. The sound grew louder, followed by a distinctive scratching noise, like claws dragging across metal. My first instinct was to investigate. I changed direction, heading toward the stairs that would take me down to the cargo hold. The noises grew more pronounced with each step, growling that didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard, interspersed with that metallic scratching that sent chills up my spine. My hand was already on the door handle leading to the cargo area when Terry's second rule flashed in my mind. Stay out of the cargo hold during daylight. I pulled my hand back like the metal had burned me. Whatever was making those sounds, the rules said to stay away. After what I'd seen last night, I wasn't taking chances. I turned and nearly collided with Asher Thompson, who was carrying a clipboard and checking something off a list. "Hey," I said, stepping back. "Do you hear that? Those noises from the cargo hold?" Asher glanced at the door I'd almost opened, then back at me. His expression remained neutral, but something in his eyes tightened. "Yeah, we all hear it," he said, keeping his voice low. "Nobody goes in there during daylight. That's just how it is on this ship." "But what's making those sounds?" I pressed. Asher shrugged. "Just follow the rule. Captain's orders." He walked away without further explanation, leaving me standing there as another growl, louder than before, emanated from behind the door. The scratching sounds intensified, as if whatever was in there knew someone was just outside. I backed away and continued to the mess hall, the sounds following me until I turned the corner. Over breakfast, I couldn't stop thinking about what might be in the cargo hold. The ship's manifest listed standard supplies, equipment for coastal communities, food stores, building materials, nothing that would explain those sounds. Throughout the morning, I tried to focus on my assigned tasks, but the noises continued, sometimes fading to almost nothing, then returning with renewed intensity. The growling occasionally shifted to something that sounded almost like words, though I couldn't make them out. At noon, as I was helping Sage secure some equipment that had come loose during the night, the sounds stopped completely. The sudden silence was almost as unsettling as the noises had been. I was coiling rope on the deck when Terry appeared beside me, his weathered face serious. "You were near the cargo hold this morning," he said. It wasn't a question. "I heard noises," I admitted. "I was curious." Terry's expression darkened. "Curiosity will get you killed on this ship. I don't care what you hear from that hold. Growling, scratching, voices calling your name, even if it sounds like someone you know is dying in there. You stay out during daylight. All of us do, even the captain." I nodded, thinking about how Captain Young had taken a notably longer route during yesterday's tour, avoiding that particular section of the ship entirely. "What's in there?" I asked. Terry shook his head. "Just follow the rules, kid. That's all you need to know." He walked away, and I noticed his hand was shaking slightly. Whatever was in that cargo hold scared even Terry, who seemed unfazed by most things on this bizarre voyage. The next few days passed in a blur of work routines and careful rule following. I kept the paper with me at all times, reading it before bed each night, committing each rule to memory. The cargo hold continued its daylight concert of growls and scratches, but I stayed far away, noting that none of the crew went near it until after sunset. On the third night of the voyage, I was assigned the midnight to 4 a.m. watch. The bridge was quiet, just the hum of equipment and the occasional crackle of the radio. Captain Young had checked in before heading to his quarters, leaving me to monitor our course and keep an eye on the radar. Around 2 in the morning, the radio suddenly came to life with a burst of static that made me jump. I reached for it out of habit, then hesitated, remembering Terry's third rule. Don't respond if the ship's radio calls your name at night. The static continued, then cleared slightly. "Marcus." The voice was faint, distorted by static, but recognizable in a way that made my blood run cold. "Marcus, are you there? It's me." I sat frozen, my hand hovering over the radio. It couldn't be. It was impossible. "Marcus, please answer. It's Braden. I need your help." My brother Braden had died 3 years ago, yet the voice on the radio sounded exactly like him. The same slight hesitation before certain words, the same pitch and tone. "Remember when we built that treehouse in the backyard and Dad got so mad because we used his good tools?" The voice continued, growing clearer. "Or that time we went fishing at Lake Chelan and you fell in trying to net that huge trout? Marcus, please talk to me. I'm lost and I need your help. I can't find my way home." My hand trembled as it moved toward the radio. These were real memories, things only Braden would know. Maybe I'd been wrong all this time. Maybe he hadn't died. Maybe Terry's rule flashed in my mind again. Don't respond if the ship's radio calls your name at night. With enormous effort, I pulled my hand back and switched the radio to a different channel, cutting off my brother's voice mid-sentence. The silence that followed was deafening. I sat there for the remainder of my watch, staring at the radio, half expecting it to crackle back to life. It didn't. Outside, the sea was calm, the night clear. Everything seemed normal, except for the voice of my dead brother that had just spoken to me through the ship's radio. Had I made the right choice? What if, somehow, it really had been Braden? What would have happened if I'd answered? Would I have been able to help him? Or was it something else entirely, using my brother's voice and memories to lure me into breaking Terry's rule? I thought about the creature I'd seen in the water, the noises from the cargo hold, and now this. What kind of ship had I signed onto? More importantly, what would happen during the remaining weeks of this voyage? When my watch ended, I walked back to my cabin, the radio conversation replaying in my mind. I didn't know if I'd made the right choice, but I was still here, still alive. On this ship, it seemed, that counted for something. I stepped outside on the 5th night to check the rigging on the port side. The weather had been clear all day, making it a good time to inspect for any loose equipment before another expected patch of rough seas hit us tomorrow. I carried my flashlight and a small toolkit, moving carefully along the deck while most of the crew slept below. The ship swayed gently beneath my feet as I tightened a loose cable near the forward mast. The work was simple enough, just the kind of routine maintenance that kept the Northern Star running smoothly. I'd been keeping my head down for days, following Terry's rules to the letter after what happened with the radio and my brother's voice. I finished securing the cable and stood up, stretching my back after being hunched over. That's when I noticed it. The moon hung above the horizon, but something was wrong. It looked too big, impossibly big, taking up nearly a quarter of the sky. And the color, it wasn't the familiar silvery white of a normal moon. This one glowed with a deep, pulsing red that cast the entire deck in a crimson light. I knew immediately this was what Terry's 4th rule warned about. Don't look at strange or large moons. The words flashed in my mind, clear as day. I needed to look away. I needed to turn around, go back inside, find something else to focus on. But I couldn't. The red glow seemed to reach out to me, wrapping around my thoughts. The longer I stared, the more the moon seemed to throb with a heartbeat-like rhythm. Each pulse sent waves of red light washing over the ship. I tried to blink, to turn my head, but my body wouldn't respond. A strange warmth spread through my mind, like fingers gently opening doors that should stay closed. I felt a pull, not physical at first, but something deep in my thoughts, a voice without words telling me to come closer. My feet moved forward, one step, then another. I didn't want to move. I was screaming at myself to stop, but my body ignored every internal command. My feet kept carrying me toward the rail, toward the edge of the ship. 3 more steps and I'd be at the railing. 2 more steps. The red light grew brighter, more intense. The moon seemed to be watching me, waiting for me. My hands reached for the rail. Behind me, the deck door slammed open with a bang. "Marcus!" I heard Terry's voice, but it sounded far away, muffled by the red haze filling my mind. Something crashed loudly to my right. Glass shattered, the sound cutting through the strange fog in my head. The spell broke instantly. like a rubber band snapping. I stumbled backward, nearly falling as control returned to my limbs. Terry stood a few feet away, breathing hard, a fire extinguisher in his hands. He'd smashed one of the deck windows, sending glass across the metal floor. The sound had broken whatever hold the moon had on me. I looked down at my feet. I was one step away from the railing. "Don't look up again," Terry warned, keeping his own eyes fixed on the deck. "Keep your head down and get inside." I followed him through the door, my legs shaky and weak. Once inside the narrow corridor, Terry set the fire extinguisher down and leaned against the wall. "That was close," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead despite the cool night air. "Too close." "What? What just happened out there?" I asked, my voice hoarse. "Red moon almost got another one," Terry said simply. "Shows up a few times a year, always looks different to each person who sees it, always makes them walk toward the edge." I couldn't stop looking at it, I admitted. I tried to look away, but nobody can, Terry cut in. "Once it gets in your head, you need something else to break the connection. Loud noise usually works. Pain sometimes. Breaking glass always seems to do the trick." I rubbed my face with my hands, trying to clear the lingering fog from my mind. "What happens if you reach the railing?" Terry looked at me, his weathered face grim in the corridor's yellow light. "You go over, and you don't come back up." He picked up the fire extinguisher and started walking toward the storage closet. "Get some sleep if you can, and remember, if you see that moon again, look away immediately, before it sees you." I went back to my cabin, but sleep didn't come easily that night. The next morning at roll call, I stood with the rest of the crew on deck as Captain Hayes read through the names. The incident with the moon had left me feeling drained, but I was trying to focus on the day ahead. "Thompson," Hayes called. "Here," Asher responded. "Boyd." "Present," Sage answered. Hayes continued down his clipboard, and I noticed someone standing at the far end of the line, a tall figure I hadn't seen before. He wore the same work clothes as the rest of us, but something about him seemed off. His features were hard to make out, like looking at someone through foggy glass. When Hayes finished the roll call without mentioning this person, I frowned. The captain had called every name except for the tall strangers. Nobody else seemed to notice or care that there was an extra person standing with us. As the crew dispersed to their stations, I approached David, who was checking a fuel gauge nearby. "Hey," I said, trying to sound casual. "Who's the new guy?" David looked up from the gauge. "What new guy?" I turned to point toward where the tall figure had been standing, but he was gone. There was someone at the end of the line during roll call. "Tall guy, I haven't seen him before." David shook his head. "It's just the regular crew, Marcus. Nobody new came aboard." I let it go, thinking maybe I'd imagined it after the strange night, but at lunch I saw him again. The mess hall was busy with the usual chatter and movement of the crew eating their midday meal. I filled my tray and looked for a place to sit when I spotted him, the same tall figure, sitting alone at a corner table. Nobody approached his table or acknowledged him in any way. I blinked, and he was gone. The table sat empty, no tray, no sign anyone had been there at all. Miguel walked past me with his own lunch. "You okay?" Looking a little spooked. "Did you see someone sitting at that table just now?" I asked, nodding toward the empty corner. Miguel glanced over. "No one's been at that table all day. You feeling all right?" I mumbled something about being tired and joined Asher at another table. Throughout lunch, I kept glancing at the empty corner, half expecting the figure to reappear. Later that afternoon, I found Terry alone on the bridge, checking weather reports. I waited until he finished before bringing it up. "Terry, I need to ask you something," I said, keeping my voice low even though we were alone. "I've been seeing someone on the ship, someone who shouldn't be here, a tall figure that nobody else seems to notice." Terry's hands went still on the weather map. He didn't look surprised. "Rule 5, he said quietly. "Don't acknowledge unfamiliar crew members," I recited. So it's real, this person I'm seeing? Terry folded the weather map carefully. It's not a person, not anymore, maybe never was. He looked around to make sure we were still alone. Shows up every few weeks, always looks different to whoever sees it. Some see a woman, some see a man, always dressed like one of us, always watching. What is it? I asked. Don't know exactly, but I know what happens to people who talk to it or even look at it too long. Terry's voice dropped even lower. They start acting strange, talking to themselves. Then one night they're just gone, empty bunk in the morning. A chill ran down my back. Gone where? Overboard, maybe, or somewhere worse. Terry put a hand on my shoulder. If you see it again, look away. Don't acknowledge it. Don't talk about it with the others. Most of them can't see it anyway. But you can? I asked. Terry nodded slowly. Been seeing it for years. Different faces, same thing underneath. He picked up his clipboard. Just follow Rule 5, Marcus. Pretend it's not there, and eventually, it'll leave you alone. I left the bridge with a new understanding of the 5th rule. Whatever this entity was, it was watching me now, and according to Terry, the best strategy was to ignore it completely. As I headed back to my station, I wondered how many other dangers were hiding in plain sight aboard the Northern Star, invisible to most but deadly to those who could see them. I felt the first tremor beneath my feet around 8 in the evening. At the time, I didn't think much of it, just another rough patch of sea. But then the waves started growing, and within an hour, what had been a gentle rocking turned into violent pitching that sent loose items flying across my cabin. The storm came out of nowhere. One minute we had clear skies and manageable seas, and the next, dark clouds swallowed the horizon and advanced toward us with unnatural speed. I'd been through bad weather before, but something about this felt different, targeted almost, like the storm had sought us out specifically. I made my way to the bridge, gripping handrails as the ship lurched beneath me. Captain Young stood at the helm, his face illuminated by the glow of instruments as he barked orders into a radio. Lightning flashed outside the windows, briefly revealing waves that looked impossibly tall, mountains of water that seemed to defy natural physics. "Cook!" Captain Young called when he spotted me. "Get below and make sure everything's secured. We're in for a rough night." I nodded and headed back into the corridor, nearly losing my footing as the ship rolled hard to port. The wind howled outside, not just loud but somehow wrong, with a pitch that made my skin crawl. It almost sounded like words buried in the roar. As I moved through the ship, checking equipment and helping secure anything loose, the waves grew even larger. They crashed over the deck with such force that the entire vessel shuddered. Through the portholes, I caught glimpses of water washing across the deck in sheets, powerful enough to sweep away anything not bolted down. The lights flickered once, then again. I froze, thinking of Terry's 6th rule: keep lights on at night. The memory of that paper with its handwritten warnings felt like a talisman in my mind now, something I clung to for survival. I had just reached the mess hall when it happened. The lights flickered a third time and then went out completely. Every electrical system on the ship died simultaneously, plunging us into absolute darkness, the kind of darkness you can feel pressing against your eyeballs, thick and suffocating. In that same moment, the sounds from the cargo hold, and which had been a background noise for days, suddenly amplified. The growling became deeper, more guttural. The scratching turned into violent scraping, like something massive trying to claw its way through metal. Whatever was in there seemed energized by the darkness. "Shit," I whispered, fumbling for my pocket flashlight. The beam looked pathetically small against the overwhelming blackness. Rule 6 echoed in my head: restore power immediately if it fails. The air around me changed, becoming heavier, harder to breathe. An unnatural cold settled over everything, the kind that seeps into your bones. This wasn't just the air conditioning failing, this was something else entirely, something wrong. I pushed through the thickening atmosphere toward the engine room, knowing that's where Terry and the engineering crew would be fighting to restore power. The cargo hold noises grew louder as I passed near it, and I swore I heard something massive slam against the bulkhead, making the metal groan. When I reached the engine room, I found Terry and Blake Quinn, the chief engineer, already working frantically. Emergency backup lights provided minimal illumination, just enough to see their grim faces and the mess of electrical panels they were working on. "Marcus," Terry spotted me. "Good timing. We need another pair of hands." Quinn barely looked up from the electrical panel he was wrestling with. "The main breakers keep tripping. Something's drawing too much power somewhere on the ship." "Or something's making them trip," Terry muttered, too quietly for Quinn to hear. I joined them, following Quinn's instructions as we replaced blown fuses and attempted to reroute power through backup systems. The work was technical and demanding, made worse by the constant motion of the ship and the oppressive atmosphere that seemed to grow heavier by the minute. "The backup generator should have kicked in automatically," Quinn said, frustration evident in his voice. "Something's interfering with the whole system." While we worked, the noises from elsewhere in the ship intensified. The growling from the cargo hold now sounded like it was just outside the engine room door, deep, resonant, and somehow intelligent. Metal scraped against metal, sometimes in patterns that almost resembled words. "Don't listen to it," Terry warned when he saw me glancing toward the door. "Focus on the task." For 3 hours we fought with the electrical systems. My hands grew slick with sweat despite the unnatural cold. Twice we thought we'd fix the issue, only to have the breakers trip again seconds later. Quinn grew increasingly bewildered, muttering about how none of this made sense from an engineering standpoint. The sounds outside grew more threatening. Scratches became violent bangs. The growls turned into something that sounded almost like laughter, deep, echoing, and utterly wrong. "There's something out there," I finally said, unable to ignore it any longer. Terry met my eyes, but didn't contradict me. "That's why we need the lights back on." After the 3rd hour of struggling, Quinn finally traced the problem to a junction box that had somehow been damaged. Once bypassed, the system held. Lights flickered back to life throughout the ship, starting with the engine room and spreading outward. The moment illumination returned, everything else stopped. The oppressive weight in the air vanished. The bone-deep cold dissipated almost instantly. Most notably, the sounds, the growling, scratching, banging, ceased completely, as if someone had flipped a switch. Quinn wiped sweat from his forehead, looking relieved but confused. "Strangest electrical failure I've ever seen. Must have been the storm interfering with the systems somehow." Terry and I exchanged a look. We both knew better. When Quinn moved away to check other systems, Terry leaned close to me. "Now you understand the 6th rule." I nodded slowly. "What would have happened if we hadn't gotten the lights back on?" Terry's face was grim. "Let's just say, there's a reason we work so hard to keep them on. Whatever's out there, it needs darkness to fully manifest." I thought about those 3 hours of escalating threats, the sounds growing louder, more aggressive, more purposeful. Whatever had been trying to get in had been getting closer to succeeding. As I helped Terry and Quinn finish securing the electrical systems, I couldn't shake a single terrifying thought. What would have happened if the darkness had lasted the entire night? The 6th rule now made perfect chilling sense, and I never wanted to learn firsthand why it existed. I kept track of time in my head these days. 8 days since I'd first boarded the Northern Star. 5 days since I'd seen the massive sea creature. 4 days since my dead brother's voice had called to me through the radio. 3 days since the red moon had nearly pulled me overboard, and 2 since the mysterious crew member with the foggy face had appeared. I lay in my bunk, watching the ceiling, counting each creak and groan of the ship as it cut through the water. Sleep didn't come easy anymore, not with what I knew now. The folded paper with Terry's 6 rules stayed in my pocket at all times. I'd read it so many times I had memorized every word, every warning. The paper itself had become worn at the creases, softened by constant handling. My life depended on those rules. Another night, another watch shift. I moved through the corridors with purpose, eyes forward, never lingering. The radio crackled to life as I passed the communications room. Marcus, a woman's voice, soft and familiar, drifted from the speakers. Marcus, honey, it's Mom. I froze for half a second. The voice was perfect, the exact cadence and warmth my mother used when she called me on Sunday afternoons. But I remembered rule number 3. Don't respond if the ship's radio calls your name at night. My fingers twitched with the urge to pick up the receiver, to hear more of that comforting voice I hadn't heard in weeks. Instead, I walked past without breaking stride. Marcus, please. I need to talk to you. Something's happened to your father. I quickened my pace, leaving the voice behind. Whatever was using my mother's voice wasn't her. I'd learned that lesson with Braden's voice. These things, whatever they were, knew how to dig into your memories, how to find the voices that would make you break the rules. I reached the deck and focused on my assigned tasks. Check the tie-downs, inspect the winch cables, log any issues. Simple mechanical work that kept my mind occupied and away from the voices that weren't really voices. Something moved at the edge of my vision, a dark shape sliding along the periphery. I kept my eyes forward, refusing to turn my head. Rule 5 was clear. Don't acknowledge unfamiliar crew members. I'd seen the foggy-faced figure 3 more times since Terry had explained its nature. Each time I'd looked away immediately, pretending I hadn't seen anything at all. The shape lingered, hovering just at the corner of my eye. I could feel it watching me, waiting for me to look. Instead, I knelt down and busied myself with checking a loose bolt, keeping my gaze fixed firmly on my work. After a minute or two, the presence faded. I exhaled slowly, not realizing I'd been holding my breath. The growling from the cargo hold had become a constant daytime companion. Sometimes it sounded like words in a language I couldn't understand. Other times, it was just raw animal sounds. The scratching had gotten worse too, more frantic, more desperate. Whatever was in there wanted out. I gave the cargo hold door a wide berth whenever I passed it. Rule 2. Stay out of the cargo hold during daylight. No matter how curious I got, and God, was I curious, I stayed away. I'd seen the fear in Terry's eyes when he talked about it. That was enough to keep me back. That night I spotted the red glow through the porthole in my cabin. The crimson light began to seep in, painting the walls with an unnatural hue. Without hesitation, I grabbed my jacket and left, heading to the interior corridors where there were no windows. I found a corner in the mess hall and sat there for hours, reading an old magazine someone had left behind, until the normal gray light of dawn replaced the red. Rule 4. Don't look at strange or large moons. I'd nearly died breaking that one. I wouldn't make the same mistake twice. As days passed, I started noticing patterns. The radio calls almost always came between 2 and 3 in the morning. The foggy crew member appeared most often during shift changes when people were coming and going. The cargo hold was loudest around noon and quietest just after sunset. The red moon seemed to appear every 3rd night. I wasn't the only one who had adapted. I watched the other crew members and saw their own systems. David always wore earplugs during his night watch. Miguel carried a small mirror that he would check before turning corners. Paul whistled constantly when working near the cargo hold during the day. We were all survivors here, each with our own methods. Nobody talked about it openly, but the knowing glances, the subtle nods when someone avoided a danger, it created an unspoken bond between us. I was mopping the corridor outside the mess hall when I heard voices inside. Miguel and David were having lunch, their conversation drifting through the partially open door. "You think the new guy knows about the thing in cabin 4 yet?" Miguel asked, his voice low. Doubt it, David replied. Terry only told him the basics. Nobody mentions cabin 4 unless they have to. I slowed my mopping, straining to hear more. Last night it was scratching at my wall again, Miguel continued. 3 hours straight. Couldn't sleep at all. At least it stayed in there, David said. Remember when Hansen went in to check? Never saw him again. Yeah, well, that's why we keep it locked now. Their voices dropped lower, and I couldn't make out anything else. I resumed mopping, my mind racing. Cabin 4? Terry had never mentioned anything about Cabin 4. There were 6 rules on his list, 6 specific threats to avoid, but Cabin 4 wasn't among them. I thought back to my first day aboard, when Captain Young had given me the tour. We'd passed all the crew cabins, but I couldn't recall if we'd stopped at Cabin 4. Had we skipped it entirely? Was it even on the same corridor as the other cabins? A cold realization settled in my stomach. If Terry hadn't told me about Cabin 4, what else hadn't he mentioned? How many other dangers were lurking on this ship that I knew nothing about? The 6 rules had kept me alive so far, but they might not be enough. There could be 7 rules, or 8, or dozens. Each crew member probably knew different pieces of the puzzle, different threats they'd personally encountered and survived. I finished mopping and put the equipment away, my mind still turning over this new information. The Northern Star was larger than I'd initially thought, with more corridors and compartments than I'd explored. How many of those spaces held their own horrors? How many rules would I need to learn before I truly knew how to survive this voyage? I patted my pocket, feeling the folded paper with its 6 rules. It had been my lifeline, but now I understood it was just the beginning. There was more to learn, more to avoid, more to fear, and we still had days before we'd reach Vancouver Island. I sensed something different about this storm. The way it descended on us felt deliberate, targeted, like it knew exactly where we were and what it wanted. Just 2 days from Vancouver Island, we'd been making good time with favorable winds. I'd started to believe we might actually complete this voyage without further incident. Then the barometer dropped faster than I'd ever seen, and clouds rolled in from nowhere, black and boiling with unnatural speed. The first wave hit while I was securing equipment on the lower deck. It wasn't just the size that bothered me. I'd seen bigger waves before, but the way it moved, curving around the ship's hull like fingers grasping at us. I stumbled backward as water washed across the deck, soaking me to the skin. "Get inside," David shouted from the doorway. "Captain wants all hands below." I didn't need to be told twice. As I made my way toward the door, another wave crashed over the starboard side with enough force to knock me sideways. I grabbed the railing to keep from going overboard and pulled myself toward the hatch. Inside, the corridors were alive with activity. Crew members securing loose items, checking emergency equipment, preparing for what was clearly going to be a rough night. The ship pitched violently, sending me into the wall. I braced myself against a support beam as the overhead lights flickered. That's when I heard it. The wind, not just howling, but speaking. I couldn't make out words exactly, but the sounds had rhythm, patterns that felt like language. I'd heard strange things on this ship before, but this was different, more direct, more intentional. Miguel passed me in the corridor, his face tight with worry. "This is bad," he said, "really bad. Something's angry." I wanted to ask him what he meant by something, but he was already moving away, heading toward the bridge. The ship lurched again, and I had to grab a handrail to stay upright. Then came the noise from the cargo hold. We'd all gotten used to the daily growls and scratches, but this was different. The sound that erupted from below decks wasn't just louder, it was furious. Deep, guttural roars echoed through the ship, followed by tremendous impacts that shook the entire vessel. It sounded like something massive was throwing itself against the hull from inside the hold. The lights flickered again, longer this time, and I remembered Terry's 6th rule. Keep lights on at night, restore power immediately if it fails. I headed toward the engine room, picking up my pace as the impacts from the cargo hold grew more violent. The metal walls around me vibrated with each blow, and I could feel the vibrations through my boots. Whatever was down there wanted out, and it sounded like it might actually succeed this time. Halfway to the engine room, the corridor ahead of me darkened, not from the lights failing, but because something was blocking them. A figure standing perfectly still in the middle of the passage. The mysterious crew member. In all the previous appearances, the figure had been hazy, features indistinct like looking through fog. Not anymore. It stood before me with unnatural solidity, wearing the same standard work clothes as the rest of us, but now I could make out details. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a face that seemed to shift slightly whenever I tried to focus on specific features. Rule 5. Don't acknowledge unfamiliar crew members. I kept my eyes down and tried to move past, but the figure shifted to block my path. This was new. It had never directly interfered before, only watched. "Look up," it said, voice neither male nor female, but somehow both at once. "The red moon is beautiful tonight." I nearly glanced up from pure shock at hearing it speak, but caught myself. Rule 4. Don't look at strange large moon. "You need to see it," the figure continued, voice growing more insistent. "It's calling for you specifically. Just one look." I kept my eyes fixed on the floor and tried to push past. The figure didn't move like a solid object should. It felt like pushing through cold water, leaving my skin tingling and numb where we made contact. The lights flickered again, and in that moment of darkness, I felt cold breath against my ear. "They're lying to you," it whispered. "The rules won't save you. Nothing will." When the lights returned a second later, the figure was gone. I didn't waste time wondering where it went. I ran the rest of the way to the engine room. The door was open, and inside I found chaos. Equipment that should have been secured had toppled over, tools scattered across the floor. Paul was at the main electrical panel, frantically working with a flashlight clenched between his teeth. Terry lay on the floor nearby, a gash across his forehead leaking blood. I rushed to Terry first, checking his pulse. Still alive, but out cold. A fallen toolbox lay beside him. Must have hit him when the ship pitched. "What happened?" I asked Paul, moving to help him. "Breakers keep tripping," Paul said, without looking away from the panel. "Something's drawing too much power, same as before, but worse." He yanked out a blown fuse and replaced it with a spare. It lasted about 3 seconds before popping with a sharp crack. "Damn it!" I grabbed Terry's first aid kit from the wall and quickly bandaged his head, then joined Paul at the panel. Outside, the storm seemed to intensify with each passing minute. The ship groaned under the assault of waves, and the impacts from the cargo hold had become a steady, rhythmic pounding. "We need to get the lights back on," I said. "No shit," Paul snapped, then immediately looked apologetic. "Sorry, but I've tried everything. Something's deliberately sabotaging the system. Look." He pointed to a readout on his diagnostic tool. "Power's being drawn to multiple locations simultaneously, overloading the circuits faster than we can fix them." I thought about what Terry had told me after the last power failure, about how whatever was outside needed darkness to fully manifest. If we couldn't keep the main power on, "We need a backup plan," I said. "The emergency generator?" Paul shook his head. "Already tried. Something's interfering with it too. Won't start." I looked around the engine room, thinking fast. My eyes landed on a storage locker where I knew we kept emergency equipment. "What about the battery-powered emergency lights?" I asked. "The portable ones?" "What about them?" "They're not strong enough to power the ship." "No, but they might be enough to keep the darkness away." Understanding dawned on Paul's face. He nodded and moved to the locker, pulling out several battery-powered lamps and flashlights. "We need to place these in crucial areas," I said. "Bridge, corridors, mess hall, sleeping quarters." "What about the cargo hold?" Paul asked. I shook my head. "Definitely not there. Focus on where people are." We divided the equipment between us. I took a moment to check on Terry again, still unconscious but breathing steadily. Then I grabbed my share of the lights and headed out. The ship's corridor was now completely dark except for my flashlight beam. The sounds from outside had changed. The wind's howling now clearly formed words I couldn't quite understand, and the impacts against the hull had taken on a pattern that sounded almost like code. I worked quickly, setting up battery lamps at key junctions and common areas. Each small pool of light felt like a tiny island of safety in a sea of encroaching darkness. The storm continued to pound the ship, waves crashing over the deck with such force I could feel the impact through the floor. I'd just finished placing a lamp in the mess hall when the main lights failed completely. For a moment, absolute darkness filled the ship, accompanied by a sudden, expectant silence. Then my emergency lights flickered on, creating small circles of illumination that pushed back the darkness just enough. The reaction was immediate and terrifying. A sound like 1,000 voices screaming in rage erupted from all around the ship. The pounding from the cargo hold intensified to a frenzy, and I could swear I felt something massive moving through the corridors just beyond the reach of the light. I made my way back toward the engine room, staying within the small pools of illumination from the emergency lamps. Each step between light sources felt like crossing an abyss, with something watching and waiting for me to make a mistake. When I reached the engine room, Paul was still working frantically at the panel. He'd set up several lamps around the room, creating a relatively well-lit space. "It's working," I said. "The lights are holding it back." Paul nodded without looking up. "Whatever it is, I've never seen electrical systems fail like this. It's like something's eating the power." Outside, the cacophony of sounds continued to build, the wind words growing louder, the impacts more violent. The ship shuddered continuously under the assault. I checked Terry again. He was stirring now, eyelids fluttering. For what felt like hours, we waited in our island of light as the storm raged and something tried to break through. The battery lamps began to dim slightly, their charge gradually depleting. I found myself counting the minutes, wondering if we had enough power to last until dawn. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, everything stopped. The pounding ceased. The wind dropped to a normal howl. The pressure in the air, that sense of malevolent attention, vanished. Paul and I looked at each other, neither willing to believe it was over. "What just happened?" he whispered. "I don't know," I answered truthfully. Terry groaned and sat up, holding his bandaged head. "Did we make it?" he asked, voice rough. "I think so," I said. "For now." Outside, the storm continued, but it felt natural now. Just wind and waves, not something alive and hunting. The ship still rocked in heavy seas, but the violence had gone out of the motion. Paul checked his watch. 4:37, he said, almost dawn. I helped Terry to his feet. He leaned heavily against me, still dizzy from his injury. "It was worse this time," Terry said quietly. "Much worse. It's getting stronger." I didn't ask what it was. I wasn't sure I wanted to know. The three of us stood there in the engine room, surrounded by our failing emergency lights, listening to the now ordinary sounds of the storm outside. We'd survived, but the victory felt temporary. Vancouver Island was still 2 days away, and I couldn't shake the feeling that whatever had attacked us tonight wasn't finished. It was just regrouping. I stood on deck, feeling the difference in the air. After 2 weeks of supernatural terrors, something had changed in the past few hours as we approached Vancouver Island. The constant background of strange noises had faded until I wasn't sure when exactly they'd stopped. The sea stretched out calm and ordinary, no voices calling my name from the depths, no promises or pleas, just water slapping against the hull in the rhythm of normal waves. I walked past the cargo hold on my inspection rounds and paused, waiting for the familiar growls and scratches that had become a constant soundtrack to my days aboard the Northern Star. Nothing. Complete silence greeted me where there had been inhuman sounds for days. I even pressed my ear against the cold metal door, half expecting to hear something faint, but there was only the mechanical hum of the ship itself. That night, I sat in the communications room during my shift, monitoring channels as we approached the coast. The radio crackled with routine messages between ships and harbor control, position reports, weather updates, docking instructions. No ghostly voices called my name. No one pretended to be my dead brother or my mother. The radio was just a radio again. I looked through the porthole at the night sky. The moon hung above the horizon, a perfect crescent, normal-sized and silver-white. No pulsing red glow, no hypnotic pull urging me toward the rails. I stared at it for several minutes, testing myself, but felt nothing beyond the ordinary appreciation of its light on the water. During shift changes, I watched the corridors carefully, looking for the mysterious crew member with the shifting face. The passages remained empty, except for the regular crew I'd come to know. The entity that had tried to lure me toward the red moon had vanished along with all the other horrors. As dawn broke, I could see the coastline of Vancouver Island in the distance. The familiar silhouette of mountains rose from the water, and small fishing boats dotted the approaches to the harbor. We'd be docked before noon. I finished my morning duties and climbed up to the forward deck. The air smelled different here, trees and land mixed with the salt. After 2 weeks of nothing but ocean, even the distant smell of the shore felt like a gift. I watched the harbor growing closer, counting the buoys and channel markers. The sun warmed my face as I leaned against the rail, feeling something close to peace for the first time since boarding. "Glad to be back?" Terry's voice came from behind me. I turned to find him walking toward me, his weathered face looking more relaxed than I'd seen it during our entire voyage. He joined me at the rail, looking toward the approaching harbor. "I thought I would be more relieved," I admitted. Everything stopped, the voices, the cargo hold, the radio calls, even that thing pretending to be crew. "When did it all stop?" Terry nodded, squinting at the horizon. "Always happens this way. About 50 miles from shore, everything goes quiet. Whatever's out there stays out there. So it's safe here?" "Safe as anywhere," Terry said. "The ship will be heading back out in 2 weeks. Captain's putting together the crew list now. You planning to sign on for another voyage?" I hadn't thought about it until that moment. The Northern Star would return to these waters, back to the red moon and the voices from the deep, the thing in the cargo hold and all the other dangers I'd encountered. But I'd survived. I'd learned the rules and followed them. "The pay is good," I said after a long pause. Terry laughed, a genuine sound I hadn't heard from him before. "That it is. Hazard pay. Though most of the crew doesn't know what the hazard actually is. But you do, and now I do. And you still thinking of coming back?" I ran my hand along the worn rail. "I know how to survive out there now." Terry nodded, seeming to approve of my answer. "The rules work if you follow them. Most who make it through the first trip come back. Knowing what to expect makes all the difference." We stood in silence for a while, watching the harbor grow closer. Seagulls circled overhead, their cries a welcome change from the unnatural sounds we'd left behind. "How long have you been sailing these routes?" I asked. 27 years, Terry said. "Learned the rules from the cook before me. Old man named Jenkins. He gave me that same paper I gave you, told me to keep it with me at all times." "And you've never broken a rule?" Terry's face darkened slightly. "Once. Early on. Looked at the red moon. Captain at the time had to break my arm to snap me out of it. I was one step from going over. I thought about my own close call with the moon, how Terry had smashed the window to break its hold on me. "I've got the rules memorized now," I said. "Good. Keep the paper anyway. Reminder of what's at stake." The ship's horn sounded, announcing our approach to the dock. Crew members appeared on deck, preparing mooring lines and checking equipment. The familiar routines of docking seemed almost comforting after everything we'd experienced. I helped with the final preparations, working alongside David and Miguel as we secured equipment and prepared for port. They seemed different now that we were close to shore, more relaxed, joking with each other in ways they hadn't during the voyage. I wondered if they knew about the dangers or if they simply felt the relief of returning to port like any sailor. When we were finally docked, Captain Hayes called me to his cabin. He sat behind his desk with a stack of paperwork, looking as professional and composed as he had the day I boarded. "Cook tells me you handled yourself well out there," he said, shuffling through some forms. "Thank you, sir." He pushed a document across the desk. "I'm offering you a permanent position with the Northern Star. Regular runs, same route, good pay. What do you say?" I looked down at the contract. Permanent crew. The thought of going back out there should have terrified me, but instead I felt something like anticipation. I knew the dangers now. I knew how to survive them. "I'll take it," I said, picking up the pen he offered. The captain nodded, satisfied. "Not everyone makes it through their first voyage with us. Those who do tend to stay. They've learned what it takes." As I signed the papers, I thought about the other crew members, David with his earplugs during night watch, Miguel carrying a small mirror to check corners, Paul whistling constantly near the cargo hold. Each had their own strategies, their own ways of navigating the supernatural threats. "Report back in 2 weeks, Captain Hayes said, taking the signed contract. "We'll be making the same run." I left the cabin and collected my duffel bag from my quarters. The folded paper with the 6 rules was in my pocket, worn and creased from constant handling. I wouldn't need to look at it anymore. The rules were burned into my memory, but I kept it anyway, as Terry had suggested. I walked down the gangplank onto the solid ground of Vancouver Island, feeling the strange adjustment after weeks at sea. The dock bustled with activity. Workers unloading cargo, other ships arriving and departing, normal life continuing all around me. I turned back to look at the Northern Star. From here, it looked like any other cargo vessel. No hint of the supernatural dangers it encountered in the North Pacific waters. I turned back to look at the Northern Star. From here, it looked like any other cargo vessel. No hint of the supernatural dangers it encountered in the North Pacific waters. In 2 weeks, I'd be back aboard, sailing those same routes, facing those same threats. But this time, I'd be prepared. I patted my pocket where the rules paper sat. 6 simple guidelines that meant the difference between life and death. I wondered if there were other rules I hadn't learned yet, other dangers waiting to be discovered. The locked cabin 4 that Miguel and David had mentioned still bothered me. What happened to Hansen? What was scratching at the walls? Maybe next voyage I'd learn more. Maybe there were other papers with other rules passed between crew members who'd survived different encounters. The thought should have scared me, but instead I felt a strange sense of purpose. The Northern Star had changed me. 2 weeks ago I'd been focused only on the job, the practical aspects of maritime work, the paycheck at the end. Now I understood there was more to these waters than most people knew. The world was stranger and more dangerous than I'd believed, but also more fascinating. I adjusted my duffel bag on my shoulder and headed toward town. 2 weeks of solid ground, normal life, and then back to the ship. Back to the voices in the water, the thing in the cargo hold, the red moon, and whatever else waited in the North Pacific. I was ready.